I hope that you all made it safely through Christmas and your New Year's celebrations. And I'd like to begin by saying I hope that your new year is full of blessings and that maybe you can learn some new skills to add to your kitchen and your pantry this year. And I hope that I can be a part of that. I want to continue just sharing, I guess, the things that I have learned through the years. Again, I've been canning for over 40 years. I was taught by my mother. She was taught by her mother. And I have continued that tradition in my own home for almost 40 years now. So I've been canning over 40 years because I started as a teenager. Not that I know it all, but I do this on a regular basis in our home all year round. And just in my own experience, I know what makes sense. I know what works. I know what's going to be shelf stability and what isn't going to be shelf stability. So I want to share with you today something that is a little bit controversial. I think it's becoming a little bit more familiar to people, but most people were taught the traditional way of canning vegetables, where you put the raw vegetable into the jar and then you cover that with water. And most times it called for you to add salt too. And that's a wonderful method of canning. But I, 4 years ago, tried what is called dry packing potatoes. Instead of doing the traditional water brine potatoes, I tried dry packing them. And I will tell you what, I was sold immediately. I didn't even at that point in time, I didn't care how long they were going to last technically in storage. We just loved them that much that I said, I'm never making potatoes. I'm never canning potatoes the traditional way again. But along that journey in the last 4 years, I found out that these dry packed potatoes actually have a very similar shelf life to traditionally packed, water packed potatoes. And so in my opinion, it is as safe, as effective, and as wonderful, if not even better, than traditional water packed potatoes. Now, another thing I want to touch on is there's a lot of people that are using the wrong term. It's not considered dry canning. It is dry packing. Dry canning, and the reason why I feel this is so important for everybody to know is because when you're discussing this with other people, or if you're in Facebook groups and you're discussing it in discussions, there really needs to be a very definitive difference between these two terms. This that I am doing today is not dry canning. It is dry packing. Dry canning is a method of canning where you actually heat dry ingredients such as rice or beans in your oven in the jars, and then you place your lids and they seal because everything's been heated up, but it's actually dry ingredients and it's actually done in your oven. That is what dry canning is. Dry packing is traditionally canning either in a pressure canner or a hot water bath. The only difference is that after you put your vegetables into your jar, you're not going to cover them up with water before you place your lid and your ring. Okay, so there's a big difference. Dry canning, nope, that's not what this is. This is dry packing. Okay, so another controversial thing is a lot of people absolutely swear that when you are canning potatoes or carrots, you must peel them. And the reason why they swear to that is because somewhere along the way, they heard that those skins and stuff that's in the dirt that touch the skin of those vegetables can create or encourage botulism. Totally false information. Totally false, okay? When you are canning, you are heating to a degree that you are killing any pathogens possible that could be in your food items. So the old wives' tale of, you gotta peel your vegetables, that's not true. Now, you can make that decision in your own home of whether your family will eat the vegetables with the skins on. With carrots, it's not as noticeable. With potatoes, it's pretty obvious when the peels are on the potatoes. And you might have picky kids that won't touch a potato peel. I know there's a lot of picky kids that won't eat the crust of the bread, right? You make them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and they want that crust cut off. So I totally get that. So you make the choice in your own home of whether you want to peel or whether you want to leave the peel on. If you're going to leave the peel on, what I do is I scrub them super good in the sink. Okay, just like when you're peeling, you know, you're washing your potato and you're removing all that stuff, but scrub them really good with a scrub brush. And then I cut my potatoes up, my raw potatoes up into, I tend to these days try to keep them in smaller pieces. The reason why I like to cut them, and I'll show you this as an example. Hopefully I can get it on camera here. These are pretty thin. Now I cut these with just a hand knife. I didn't process them through the food processor. So they're good chunks of potatoes, but the smaller you can get them, and you could cut them smaller than this. You could even dice them if you want to. The smaller the pieces of potatoes are, the more you can actually pack it into the jar. And the reason why I think that this is important is because then you are displacing all of the empty air spaces inside of your jar. So the denser that you can pack your jar when you are dry packing, the better. When you are traditionally water brining, and I'll show you the example, I have some peel-on potatoes here. Now I packed these pretty dense, okay? But there was still air pockets in there. And when I went ahead and I added my water to the jar, the water filled up all of the empty air spaces. Now when you're dry packing, you're not adding that water. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick this in the canner just to get it out of my way. When you're dry packing, you're not adding that water, and so you're not displacing all that air. So the denser and the more settled you can get your vegetables, the better, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I do that. Now, there's another thing that I want to touch base on, the difference between soaking your potatoes and not soaking them. Now, the reason why some people soak their potatoes, and when they soak them, after they have washed them and cut them up, they soak them in water. And a lot of times it's recommended, I see all over the internet, it's recommended that you soak them for 20 minutes and then you rinse them and then you add fresh water and allow them to soak for another 20 minutes. And you can do this up to 3 times, okay? And what that does is it removes a lot of the starch from the potato, which is fine to do, but it takes a lot of additional time. So, you know, you have your time of preparing your potatoes, peeling, scrubbing, cutting, whatever, and then you just kind of come to this dead standstill because you're allowing your potatoes to soak. Yeah, you can go off and you can do other things, but in my experience, and believe me, I have done it both ways, and I'm doing it both ways today just for an example so that you can see the difference. I have some that I have soaked, and I have some that I have not. The only difference is after canning, the starch, if you don't soak those potatoes, the starch of the potatoes will settle into the bottom of your jar, into about, the bottom inch or so of your jar. And it looks thick and white and pasty. Now that does not harm anything at all. In fact, it's wonderful if you're going to use those potatoes like in a chowder or a stew or a soup. It's a wonderful thickening agent. When you go and use those canned potatoes and fry them in a frying pan, nobody even notices that that starch that was sitting in the bottom of your jar, that starch is in those fried potatoes. I promise you, nobody will know it's there. If it really truly does bother you, the last thing you could possibly do is, if you don't want to soak your potatoes to avoid having that starch, you want to do it the quick way and you don't want to soak them, if you have that starch in the bottom of your jar, when you go to open the jar, all you have to do is simply rinse your potatoes off, and that starch rinses right off. It's not difficult to remove at all. So I personally no longer, except for today, soak my potatoes. It's just a waste of my time and it's a waste of my energy. But just for comparison's sake today, I did soak what's going to be 2 jars. I soaked 2 batches, a peeled and an unpeeled batch of potatoes, just so that you can see the final product in comparison between soaked and non-soaked. All right, so I do have these are traditional packed. These are peeled, peeled potatoes that I have packed traditionally and covered with water, and I did not soak these. So we'll see how foggy and starchy this water becomes after I've canned it. Right now it looks pretty clear, but we'll see what it looks like afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place that in my canner. And I also have a traditional, I've already put it in the canner, unpeeled potato and unsoaked that is water packed. So we'll see how these turn out compared to the ones that I have soaked for 20 minutes. So in comparison, I'm going to put my camera down here so you can see how I pack these potatoes. Okay? So these are the soaked potatoes and these ones are peeled. So what I do when I'm packing my potatoes is I like to get my jar fairly full for my first fill, okay? You can see that it's kind of to the top of my funnel here, okay? I remove my funnel and then I'm going to shake and kind of settle these potatoes, all right? And I kind of shake that jar sideways and a little bit up and down, okay? And I'm also kind of pressing in with my fingers on the top to kind of get them to settle down. Now look at how much, that was all the way up to the rim. Look at how much space I now have to add more potatoes. This is what I mean by densely packing your dry packed veggies. All right, you want to settle them in. The smaller you cut those pieces of potatoes, the more densely you're going to be able to get it to pack, okay? So then I just go ahead and I continue filling to the top of the jar. Now this is another thing. With dry packed vegetables, the reason why we have siphoning is because the juices and the water that is in our jars sometimes gets pushed out or sucked out if we depressurize too quickly or if we heat too quickly. That liquid from the jar gets pushed out underneath the lid and we lose some of that liquid and we have siphoning. Well, since you're doing a dry pack and you're not putting any water in this jar, you don't have to worry about headspace, all right? There's nothing that's going to leak out. And so when I'm dry packing my vegetables, and plus, since you don't have water that's going to go inside of this jar, your vegetables will shrink. And when they shrink, they kind of settle down lower in the jar. So pack them as densely as you can and get that jar full right up to the rim. Now when I say right up to the rim, you can literally have it all the way up to the top. The only thing that you do not want to do is have it so full that something is causing resistance when you put your flat lid on. You don't want to feel anything resisting. So I can tell that this little potato here, you see this guy? He's sticking up too far. He's got to go. All right? But the rest of them, they're right up to the rim. All right? So, just like any other canning project, take a clean washcloth, a clean laundered washcloth, or a paper towel. Wipe your rim and place your lid. And put your band on, finger tight. Now, I'm going to put these at my 2 o'clock position. I'm trying to keep everything straight in my head so that I know exactly which jars I want to show you at the end for comparison. So let's get these out of the way. Now these are the unpeeled but soaked. I have soaked these. My other dry ones in here that I've already placed in the canner, these are unsoaked potatoes. But these are unpeeled and unsoaked potatoes, so we'll be able to do a comparison. I'm going to pack those exactly the same as what I did with my peeled potatoes. So I get that jar fairly full, at least to the bottom of my funnel. And then I start shaking that jar Now this is an old square jar, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to settle these. It literally has corners, but I'm going to work at it and see if I can't get them packed in there tighter. All right, I think that's about all the better I'm going to do. I didn't create quite as much room as the round jar, but you can still see that it's no longer up to the top of the rim. So I can go ahead and I can add some more potato pieces to that now that I've got them settled. Shove them down on the edges, however you want to pack them in there. Just get them good and tight because they are going to shrink and soften and, settle down in the jar as they are in the canner and cooking in that canner. So again, I'm going to pack this beautiful jar of raw potatoes as full as I can because I'm not adding water to this. This is a dry pack. So I'm going to get it right up to the rim. And you can see I'm literally right to the top of my jar. Now you only do this with dry packing. If you're doing a traditional water pack, you can see in my traditional water pack that I have left an inch headspace with both my potato pieces and the water that covers it. I've left a headspace in this jar. But with the dry pack, you don't need to leave headspace. As long as there's no resistance on that lid. Wipe your rim. Place your flat and your ring. Finger tight. Now I'm going to put this at the 12 o'clock position so that I can recall, and I will know that my square jar are those soaked ones. The next ones are the soaked ones, and the next two are we'll know that they are water brined. Okay, so I know where those are placed in the canner. Now, last but not least, another reason why I absolutely adore dry packing, and particularly potatoes, is that sometimes we have what are called fingerling potatoes, and what they are is when we go to dig our potatoes in the fall, they're just undeveloped little baby potatoes, all right? So we get all these little tiny, they're brats, if you want my opinion. They're so little. Like, look at how little this tiny little ball of a potato is. And we get a ton of these. And we do take the time to pick them out of the dirt and clean them up and bring them in for storage. But now you can see that these are completely whole potatoes, little tiny baby potatoes. And all I do is scrub them up good, just like I do my unpeeled sliced potatoes. I scrub them up good and I pop them into the jar. This is the quickest, easiest, most wonderful thing I've ever found for these tiny little potatoes in my life. And I just came up with that one last year. Don't know why I didn't think of it before now, but sometimes I'm a little slow. Anyway, all right, so that is how I do my, my dry pack potatoes. So simple. Now, a couple other things that I want to talk to you about, just make sure that we're on frame here. Another couple little things that I want to talk about. The salt part. Now, when doing traditional water brined veggies, all the recipes, all the instructions always call for you to add salt. Most canning recipes do. Tomatoes do, green beans do, yada, yada, blah, blah. Salt is always just simply an option. Salt is for taste only. When you are canning, it's not doing anything to help preserve your food. The only thing that is preserving that food is the proper temperature and the proper time for your food when you're canning. That salt isn't doing anything to preserve that food. So when I am dry packing vegetables, I don't add any salt because, as you saw, those dry vegetables, if I put a half a teaspoon or a teaspoon of salt in on top of them, what's that salt going to do? It's just going to fall right through to the bottom, or it's just going to stick all right up at the top on the first, top few pieces. So I just elect not to add salt. Now I know that some other people, when they're dry packing, they elect to add a pat of butter. And I used to do that. Okay, I used to do that. The reason why I no longer do that is because in the canning process, that pat of butter or tablespoon of butter melts and it just runs down to the bottom of the jar. And then after your jar cools, it solidifies in the bottom of your jar and you have to scrape it out of there with a rubber scraper. What good is it doing? It's not doing any good. When I'm heating my vegetables, after I've canned them and I open my jar, when I'm heating my vegetables, I then flavor with butter and salt. But during the canning process, nothing. All right, for dry packing vegetables or, whatever you're going to do dry pack, your canning times and method does not change at all. It is the exact same as when you are doing a traditional pack with water inside of your jars. So I have the appropriate amount of water in my pressure canner and I will heat it up, vent it for 10 minutes, and then I will put my weight on, bring it to pressure, and I will time these under pressure for 40 minutes. So it's the exact same time as traditionally canning potatoes, just 40 minutes. And you can do this in your pressure canner. Yes, you can also hot water bathe them. Now, the only thing that you may run into trouble with if you are hot water bathing dry packed items is that there's enough air inside of those jars because you're not filling the jars up and taking those air spaces out by filling it with water. Those jars are buoyant. And so when you hot water bath them, they don't want to submerge under the water. So what you can do is you can take an extra canning rack or a dinner plate if you're okay with it being submerged in water and boiling for a long time. Anything that's flat that would be safe to have with your jars in your canner, something that fits. Put something on top of there and weight those jars down underneath the water, okay, because they will want to float. Now you don't have that problem in your pressure canner because you only have a couple of inches of water in the bottom of your pressure canner, so they can't float if you pressure can, but they can float if you are doing a traditional hot water bath. And the traditional hot water bath, the time doesn't change either. You use the traditional time, whether it's the traditional pack or the dry pack. You use the same times. All right, so I'm going to vent my canner and bring it to pressure and pressure can it for 40 minutes. And then I'm going to take them out and I'm going to let them cool completely today before I come back on cam because I want to be able to actually touch and turn and show you these jars of potatoes so that you can see the comparison much better than me trying to, hang on to them with my jar remover tool. So I'm going to complete my canning process and let them cool completely, and then I will come back and I will show you the comparison between the traditional pack and the dry pack. See you soon. All right, guys, so we're back. We are over 12 hours since I canned these potatoes. I let them cool and seal overnight, and then this morning I got up and went to work and came home and built the fire and did all the things. And so now I'm finally back to finish this video. So they are cooled, they are sealed, and I will show you the comparison. So these are the soaked, dry packed, peel on potatoes. And as you can see, they're absolutely beautiful. Nothing is like overly brown or black. A lot of people worry if you don't cover your potatoes in water, they worry that they will turn black in the canning process. This is proof they do not turn black. They're absolutely gorgeous. So these were the soaked, skin on, dry packed potatoes. These are the unsoaked, skin on, dry packed potatoes. Do you see much of a difference between the soaked and the unsoaked? Can you see any difference at all? I can't. My soaked potatoes have a little bit of fluid in the bottom of them. Hopefully the camera is picking that up. And this will probably, over time, since we are only 12 hours from canning, they haven't had a whole lot of time to just sit here and do their thing. This will probably get thick and white and pasty. It is starch and juice from the potatoes, just as they cooked in the canner. All of that starch and water and whatever ran out of the potatoes into the bottom of the jar, and it will probably solidify and turn white, like a creamy white color. But I just want you to pay attention to how much is in there. These were the soaked ones. Now, these were the unsoaked ones, and we're looking at, if you can see that fluid level right down there at the bottom, we're looking at very comparable levels of fluid in our jar between the soaked and the unsoaked. All right? There's absolutely no difference in the way they appear. They're both beautiful white potatoes. So there's your comparison on that one. Now we have the unpeeled potatoes, which to me actually look like they browned just a little bit in the cooking process inside the canner, but they're still quite white. I mean, they're obviously not black. These were the soaked peeled potatoes. Now this one, I can tell has a little bit more fluid in it. I'm not really sure why that is, because this was not covered in water. The vegetables were not covered in water. So I don't know why my peeled potatoes rendered a little bit more fluid than the unpeeled potatoes did. But I'm just doing a comparison to show you. I really don't have those answers. They still looked beautiful. I mean, honestly, beautiful potatoes. This is the unsoaked peeled potatoes that I actually covered in water, okay? I had a little bit of fluid loss in this jar. I don't know if the potatoes sucked up some of the fluid or I had maybe a little bit of siphoning. I looked in my canner, and my canner water really isn't like foggy or anything telling me that I had siphoning, but some of that fluid has either been sucked up or it did siphon out a little bit. So these were the unsoaked, peeled, and covered in water potatoes. And you can see very clearly. Now these were all canned at the very same time. Okay? Canned at the very same time. You can see where that water level and how thick this starch is. Look at that. I can turn that jar completely on its side. And that starch is so thick at this point in time that it's not even fluidy anymore, okay? So that's a very interesting comparison. No water here, no water, and soaked, unsoaked, and covered in water inside the jar. Very interesting comparison. Both are still usable. I don't care that there's starch in that jar. I'm going to throw that into a hot dish or make a chowder out of it or whatever. Nobody's ever going to know that that white pasty starch was inside of my canning jar. They're not going to taste it. They're not going to see it. So that mainly is the comparison that I have, just to show you those little fingerling potatoes. This is how they look after they've been canned, fully cooked. I will use these, probably I will heat them up and use them almost like little roasted potatoes. I might heat them in the oven. I'll dump them into a pan and put a little bit of butter in there, maybe some garlic and parsley sprinkled over the top, and use them as roasted baby potatoes. And it won't take me very long at all because they're completely cooked. So all I really have to do is heat them up. So these small whole potatoes are wonderful. I love them. Now, as far as dry packing is concerned, I have dry packed potatoes, carrots, green beans, asparagus, and Brussels sprouts. Oh, and I've also done corn. The two things that I personally will not suggest to you are the Brussels sprouts and corn. The corn being dry packed, corn has natural sugars in it, and because there wasn't water put over the corn inside of the jar, the corn scorched and burned. All right. It's almost like leaving it in the oven too long and it burnt. So when you are canning corn, I fully suggest that you make sure that you do corn the traditional way by putting water inside of your jar after you pack your corn in there. Brussels sprouts. We had Brussels sprouts in our garden this year, and so I got the bright idea to try to can them because, I love to experiment like that. That one didn't turn out so good. Uh, not that not that there was burning or anything like that, but I just took my raw Brussels sprouts and I packed them, I cut them in half and I packed them into my quart jar and I canned them according to the traditional Brussels sprout time. The Brussels sprouts really shrank, um, even worse than like green beans do. So my jar ended up only being about a half or three quarters full. And the thing with Brussels sprouts that I found out from personal experience is that the flavor is intensified so much. Um, they just weren't pleasant at all. They were very soft. Um, if a person could make a cream soup out of them, I would say if you enjoy that taste and that flavor, I'd say go ahead and do it. Dry pack your Brussels sprouts, but it wasn't something that we really enjoyed at all. So I personally cannot suggest that one. I've seen people have wonderful results from beets and radishes. So that's another one that I want to try, even though I've tried quite a few already in the last few years. Radishes is one that I do want to try. I've heard that they turn out pretty much like a potato when you can them, particularly when you dry pack them. So that's one of those things that I'm going to look into this next summer when we plant our garden. I'm going to make sure that I plant a lot of radishes so that I can try those. The beets, I've seen people dry pack their beets and they're turning out beautiful. I've seen people now dry packing squash and pumpkin and it seems to turn out beautiful, um, which surprises me, particularly with pumpkin because it really does have quite a bit of natural sugar in there, but it seems to be working well. Now, I can't tell you about shelf stability or storage times on any of those things, but I will show you some of the ones that I have done that we haven't consumed already. As you know, I rotate our stock as I can, and so I have successfully had potatoes on my shelf as long as 3 years. I don't currently have any on hand, but I will show some that I do have on hand. Um, I did, and I haven't even cleaned these jars off, so they might be dusty. I apologize. I did some potatoes and carrots back in April of 2020, and you can see that they still look very nice. I mean, there might be a little bit of browning, but there's definitely no signs of spoiling, no signs of mold. You can see that there's quite a bit of starch in the bottom. And what I use these for is I use them in soups or stews. And we also actually love this pan fried. So these are wonderful. So there we are, April of 2020, almost a year old. And look at how wonderful they look. All right. Now, back in November of 2019, I did garlic potatoes, garlic flavored potatoes. And so what I did, I remember what I did with these. I soaked these potatoes for I think 3 20-minute sessions. And then I towel dried them and I put them in a big bowl and I took a little bit of popcorn oil. It was that Orville Redenbacher popcorn oil that you pop your popcorn in. And I just, poured just a little bit over the potatoes and tossed that so that all of my chunks of potatoes were covered in that Orville Redenbacher popcorn oil. And then I sprinkled on my seasonings and my dried garlic. And then I packed and canned my potatoes. And these still look wonderful also. A little bit of fluid still in the bottom of the jar. And like I said, this is November of 2019. So 2019, 2020, 2021, this is going on 2.5 years. 2.5 years of dry pack canning. And look at how beautiful it is. All right. So that's why I say that shelf life is absolutely comparable between dry packing and water packing. Another one that I have done, like I mentioned, was asparagus. This was in February of 2020. So this is a year old. I mean, here we are in January of 22, but come next month, this jar is 1 year old. Sadie, honey, my son is coming home from work, so now the dog's gonna go crazy. But anyway, Sadie, honey, Sadie, I know. Can you come here, please? Hey, come on. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Just be quiet a minute. I know. Hush, 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 hush. All right, so here's my asparagus. I'm going to pause the video until the dog is over her excitement. I'll come right back. All right, guys. So you just have to laugh at life. The welcoming brigade has quieted down, and I reviewed my the last few minutes of the previous clip, and I was saying February of 2020, and here we are in 22. So this is a year old. No, this is actually 2 years old. Whatever. Sometimes, when you're trying to make a video, it's really hard to think quickly. And obviously I didn't think quickly on that one. So here is my asparagus from February of 2020. So we have gone through February of 2021 and we are going on to February of 2022. So I want to show you how wonderful this asparagus looks also. And this stuff inside the jar this is back when I was still adding butter to my dry packed veggies. And you can see this definite line of hardened butter, okay? But this is beautiful asparagus. Asparagus I do really prefer doing in these 1.5 pint jars because they're tall and they're narrow. And it supports the asparagus really well. So you can pack it in really tight in spears and it doesn't just collapse into the bottom of the jar. It holds it upright just beautifully. So asparagus is another absolute dry pack success. And then the last one that I want to show you, oh, maybe not the last one. I did a video on these. Now these were done in August of 21. So these aren't quite a year old yet, but I prefer to dry pack my green beans instead of cutting them into bite-sized pieces. I prefer to dry pack them on end, and I just pack that jar as tightly as I can. And you can see there too that there's minimal shrinkage. And this one you can tell that I added a little bit of butter to this one too. So I probably put a pat of butter in this one, but beautiful dry pack, almost a year old. Well, I guess not really almost a year old, half a year old, 6 months. There we go. Now this one is from 12 of 2019. So December of 2019. So December of 2020, December of 2021. This jar is 2 years old. These are dry packed carrots. Look at how beautiful they are. Again, this is what I'm talking about. Pat of butter, and you can tell that that's what it is. There's juice underneath it. This is butter. And that's why I say in dry packing, that butter does nothing. It just melts down to the bottom of the jar and then it re-solidifies, okay? You can look, it does not coat those carrots on the way down at all, very minimally. You can see, I don't know if I can, right here, you can see that it got caught up where that carrot is touching the edge of the jar, but mostly it just melted down into the bottom of the jar and there it sits. But these are 2-year-old dry packed carrots. So flavorful, a lot more firm than water covered carrots. I love dry packed vegetables. I'm absolutely sold on this method. If you're a little skeptical about it, or if you don't believe the results, I would suggest that you do the same thing that I did. When you are canning something, do your traditional water pack and do a single jar of dry pack and see the difference for yourself. I think you're really going to like it. Now, one of the main things that I want you to take out of this video today is dry pack or water packed, same exact time, okay? Same exact method. Prepare your canner with water inside of your canner. Prepare your water bath the same way that you always do, with the same amount of gallons of water. The canning process itself, whether it be water bath or by PC pressure canner, is exactly the same. The only thing that changes is you don't cover those vegetables in water. You just put the vegetable in the jar with no additional water and wipe that rim, place that lid, put on that band, and can it per the normal standards, okay? So I hope that you took something away from this video that maybe you didn't know before, or feel free to leave your experiences in the comments. Love to interact with all of you and give you any more additional tips or pointers that I can. I'm sold on this, absolutely sold on it. The vegetables to me taste more like roasted in the oven instead of being boiled in water where all of the life has just been sucked out of them. They're just fresh and tasty and good. So I hope you will give it a chance in your kitchen. Thank you for joining me today, and happy canning, everybody.